The world has always been obsessed with the royal family. For generations, their lives have been cast beneath a magnifying glass, with every moment captured, critiqued, and immortalized by an insatiable public eye. But in all those decades of scrutiny, rarely has there been a revelation quite like this one. This wasn't a tabloid whisper or a scandalous rumor. This was something else entirely, something raw, undeniable, and deeply personal. When famed investigative journalist and royal biographer Tom Bower finally released what he called the most damning audio evidence ever recorded about the Sussexes, the entire royal narrative shifted overnight. It all began with a crackling phone call, an audio clip no longer than 3 minutes. Just Meghan Markle and an unnamed man, a handler, by all accounts, discussing logistics. But it wasn't just any logistics. It was about flying and children. Not a child. Children. The voice identified as Meghan's was precise, firm, and oddly detached. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. They'll be flown in for 48 hours. Enough time for the press to get their shots, she allegedly says, her tone cool and calculated. The man on the other end simply agrees, stating that transport and handlers are already on standby. No names are mentioned, but there are labels. The children are referred to as A and L. Within moments of the tape being aired, the royal world was thrown into chaos. But nowhere did the impact hit harder than in the private quarters of Prince Harry himself. Insiders describe a scene of disbelief and fury. According to one source, Harry stormed out of his California estate, phone in hand, shouting into the wind. "What does this mean? Tell me what this means," he allegedly screamed to a staff member who looked as lost as he felt. To understand the depth of this moment, one must rewind the tape. Not just the audio, but the story of Harry and Meghan. Their journey from royal royalty to exiled celebrities has been marked by dramatic pivots and carefully orchestrated moves. From the Oprah interview to Netflix's multi-million-dollar deal, their narrative has always had an air of control, of intentional image-making. But this audio clip was not part of the plan. The shocking question it raised was simple. If Meghan is scheduling when the children should be flown in, does that mean they don't live with her and Harry? And if not, where are they? Who's with them? Are they even real? That last question may seem absurd at first, but in the strange, high-stakes world of royal narratives, nothing is off-limits. In fact, this question isn't new. There have long been whispers. The way Meghan's baby bump seemed to shift, the absence of candid footage of Archie and Lilibet, the curiously staged photos that rarely involved movement, interaction, or spontaneous affection. But this time, those whispers are being met with more than just silence. They're being met with panic. Tom Bower had been sitting on the audio clip for months, maybe even longer. He claims it came from a high-level source close to the inner workings of the Sussex household. He says he held off releasing it, waiting for the right moment. A moment when the public was no longer blindly cheering but asking hard questions. And that moment, he believed, had come. "You don't drop something like this unless you know the world is ready to hear it," Bower said in a clipped, tense interview just hours after the tape dropped. "This isn't hearsay. This isn't speculation. This is a woman on a call, coordinating when children should be brought into her home for public appearances. And that changes everything." And indeed, it did. Within 24 hours, social media was ablaze. #WhereIsArchie trended on X. Reddit threads exploded with frame-by-frame analyses of every video Meghan and Harry had released of their children. Content creators and body language experts began dissecting old footage, pointing out what they believed were red flags that had gone unnoticed: the oddly stiff movements, the repeated outfits, the mirrored angles, the lack of crying, laughing, or any spontaneous behavior. Speculation turned to suspicion. Suspicion turned to outrage. But the most jarring development was the silence, a silence so loud it drowned out every other voice in the room. Meghan, usually quick to address accusations, remained utterly quiet. No social media posts, no formal statements. Nothing from her lawyers, her team, or her PR agency. The only noise came from the royal press, and it wasn't kind. Prince Harry, however, couldn't afford to remain quiet. He reportedly made frantic calls to multiple insiders, demanding to know where the tape had come from. "Did you leak this? Was it one of you?" He allegedly shouted at a former member of their staff, who later revealed that Harry seemed more betrayed than angry, like a man watching his world unravel piece by piece. And perhaps that's exactly what was happening, because this wasn't just about optics or public image. This was about trust and truth. If Harry didn't know about the tape, what else didn't he know? If he wasn't the one scheduling their children's appearances, who was? And most terrifyingly, what if the voices on that call were telling a version of the truth he had never been prepared to face? Tom Bower has a reputation for uncovering uncomfortable truths. His previous books exposed deep fractures within the royal institution. But this was unprecedented. Never before had a senior royal's life behind closed doors been laid bare in such a raw and damning way. And the questions didn't stop there. Who recorded the call? Was Meghan aware she was being recorded? Why was there a handler managing the children's travel arrangements? Where were these children coming from and going to when not in front of cameras? As the public scrambled for answers, the palace reportedly went into crisis mode. While the Sussexes are no longer working royals, the scandal still rippled back to the monarchy. After all, these are the grandchildren of King Charles. Any stain on them becomes a stain on the institution. Senior aides allegedly advised the king to distance himself further. Prince William, known for his cool restraint, was reportedly furious behind closed doors. But nothing compared to the emotional weight pressing down on Harry. If true, this revelation could mean that the image he had fought so hard to protect, the life he believed he had built, was a carefully crafted illusion. And at the heart of it all were the two children he thought were his anchors. The emotional breakdown that followed, according to insiders, was raw and unfiltered. Some claim Harry hasn't returned to the Montecito home since the tape was released. Others say he's hired his own private investigators to verify the claims, refusing to trust even those closest to him. Whatever the truth is, one thing is clear. The man who once left everything behind for love may now be questioning whether he ever truly knew the woman he stood beside. This story isn't just about a phone call. It's about the unraveling of a narrative. A narrative sold to the world with glossy photos, heartfelt interviews, and choreographed authenticity. A narrative that may now be falling apart under the weight of its own contradictions. In the chapters that follow, we will take you deeper into this unraveling. We will explore the origins of the tape, the implications of its contents, and the cascading fallout that now threatens to destroy more than just a public image. We'll hear from sources close to the situation, analyze travel logs, revisit old interviews, and examine how one phone call has triggered a royal reckoning. Because in the end, this isn't just about Harry and Meghan. This is about truth, deception, and what happens when carefully controlled illusions are finally shattered. And if the whispers are true, the children are only the beginning. There's something almost sinister about calm. It gives you a false sense of security, an illusion of stability that makes the storm feel even more violent when it finally breaks. And for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, that calm was not only deliberate, but meticulously engineered. Before the bombshell dropped, before Tom Bower ever uttered a word about hidden recordings or handlers, before the world began to question the very existence of the Sussex children's presence in their daily lives, there existed a carefully curated world that looked, on the surface, unshakably perfect. At the heart of that illusion was their Montecito mansion, a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate nestled into the coastal hills of California. With its lush gardens, sweeping views of the Pacific Ocean, and Mediterranean-inspired architecture, the home served as both sanctuary and stage. It was where Harry and Meghan were supposed to have found peace, away from the noise and protocol of royal life. It was where the fairy tale was meant to continue, on their terms, by their rules. In that calm, the couple flourished publicly. Appearances on Oprah, Time magazine covers, high-profile partnerships with Spotify and Netflix, philanthropic ventures through Archwell, and staged holiday portraits that portrayed a peaceful domestic life surrounded by their two small children. Archie, always smiling with his red curls mirroring his father's, and Lilibet, the baby girl named after Queen Elizabeth, wrapped in her mother's arms like a symbol of familial healing. It was a campaign built on visual storytelling, emotional resonance, and quiet, but intentional rebellion. The message was clear. This was a family who had broken away from a cold institution and emerged, warm and thriving, in the California sun. But as with all images that seemed too perfect, there were cracks. Subtle, almost invisible to those who weren't looking. The timing of their media releases was always pristine, almost too pristine. Children who always looked ready for the camera. No tantrums, no grainy, out-of-focus shots, no accidental videos taken from a neighbor's iPhone or a paparazzi lens. Just polished moments, like advertisements for a lifestyle brand rather than glimpses into a real life. Insiders at the time suggested that the couple kept a tight grip on their family's privacy. They were praised for it, even admired. In a world where every public figure seemed desperate for attention, Harry and Meghan were seen as disciplined, mature. But behind that praise lingered another question. How do you keep children entirely out of public view in the digital age, unless there's something more to hide? Still, no one dared say it. Not yet. The Sussex narrative was one of love against the odds, of escape from cruelty, of building something new and wholesome. To question the integrity of that story felt almost sacrilegious, especially for fans who had followed them from the palace gates of Windsor to the studios of California. The world, it seemed, had finally decided what it wanted to believe. Even those inside royal circles had begun to accept the new normal. King Charles, though wounded by the public accusations and the apparent estrangement from his younger son, maintained a cautious optimism that reconciliation was possible. Princess Anne and Prince Edward remained largely silent, as was their nature. William, though more skeptical and reportedly still furious over Harry's memoir, refrained from any public retaliation. They knew that the media had a short memory. Time, if used wisely, could heal even the deepest wounds. So the calm persisted. It wasn't passive, it was enforced. Public appearances were calculated down to the minute. Every photo op with the children was a scheduled, copyrighted moment. When Lilibet turned 1, a single photo was released, carefully edited, full of soft light and innocent smiles. A glimpse, and nothing more. It was enough to satisfy the public's curiosity, but not enough to invite deeper scrutiny. Behind closed doors, the Sussexes were said to be working hard on multiple media projects. Meghan's podcast, which had launched with much fanfare, aimed to reclaim her voice and tell stories about female empowerment. Harry, on the other hand, was working on mental health content and advocacy, continuing his efforts from the Invictus Games platform. They were busy, purposeful, and seemingly content. But beneath that well-constructed exterior, friction was mounting. Multiple staff members had reportedly resigned in quick succession. Some cited burnout. Others, more cryptically, mentioned a controlled environment that didn't leave room for honest conversation. There were whispers of non-disclosure agreements being tightened and of internal documents being scrubbed or sealed. The Sussexes were fortifying their walls, and no one quite understood why. One former staff member, who spoke anonymously months before the tape emerged, described the atmosphere as tense and performative. It was like working in a studio set, not a home. Every detail had to be perfect. Every interaction felt rehearsed. They said, "And the children? You never just saw them. You were shown them. That's a different thing." At the time, those comments were dismissed as bitterness from an ex-employee. But they lingered. They were bookmarked by journalists and investigators. Especially those like Tom Bower, who made a career of collecting overlooked fragments and turning them into explosive narratives. As Harry and Meghan pushed ahead with their documentary series and various appearances, cracks in public trust began to grow. Their Spotify deal fell through in a rather public way. Netflix, reportedly unimpressed with the long-term results, began pushing for more behind-the-scenes access, more raw footage, more reality. But the Sussexes held firm. They promised depth and delivery, but on their terms. Then came the quiet moments. Gaps in media coverage. Delays in content. A noticeable absence of the children in real-time events. No Zoom calls with Archie popping in. No video footage of Lilibet crawling or taking her first steps. Just more portraits, more stories. And it was during one of those quiet periods that Tom Bower decided the world needed to hear what he had kept under lock and key. He didn't make a big show of it. There was no countdown, no exclusive interview. Just a short article, a clip embedded into a low-key blog post, and a single sentence beneath it. "You've asked the questions. Now hear the answer." At first, no one noticed. It took a few hours for the clip to gain traction. But when it did, it spread like wildfire. The calm broke. What followed was not just a media frenzy. It was a collective gasp, a dawning realization that perhaps everything we had believed, every smiling photo, every tearful story, every claim about royal cruelty and personal redemption, had been built on a foundation that was less than honest. The first journalist to verify the authenticity of the audio reached out to Bauer, and he was unflinching. "It's real," he said, "and it's only the beginning." Suddenly, every calm moment in the Sussex timeline was called into question. What had they been hiding behind the polished PR veneer? Who was the handler Meghan spoke to? Where were the children before those carefully scheduled appearances? And more pressingly, did Harry know? That last question became the emotional axis around which the entire scandal spun. If Harry was complicit, the betrayal was strategic. If Harry was in the dark, the betrayal was personal. Either way, something was breaking, and breaking fast. Public reactions were swift and polarized. Some refused to believe it. Others felt vindicated. But what couldn't be ignored was Harry's silence. Not the practiced, media-trained silence of a man staying on message, but the genuine, panicked silence of a man blindsided. That was when the palace began making calls. Private ones, at first, then internal meetings, then lawyers. The calm was gone, and in its place stood a storm that was just beginning to gather strength. Because behind every carefully posed photograph, there may have been a lie. Behind every tearful confession, a strategy. And now, with just a single tape, that entire world was under threat. And this was only the beginning. Tom Bauer is no stranger to controversy. He doesn't chase it. It finds him, or perhaps more accurately, he draws it out like a surgeon searching for the root of an infection buried deep beneath polished flesh. Known for his razor-sharp investigative writing and his relentless pursuit of truth, Bauer has long walked the line between revered journalist and feared exposer. But even by his standards, the contents of this vault, the one he chose to open at the most volatile moment in the Sussex saga, were unlike anything he'd ever held in his hands. To understand the gravity of what was revealed, one must first understand the man behind the leak. Tom Bauer's reputation was forged in battle. With each of his books, whether it was about powerful business tycoons, royal figures, or politicians, he developed a reputation for being methodical, coldly objective, and utterly unafraid of backlash. When he began writing about Meghan Markle, few expected him to go easy. But what he uncovered during that process didn't just shape a book. It created a secret archive, one that he quietly built for years while the world watched the Sussex fairy tale unfold. Bauer's investigation into Meghan and Harry was far more complex than his readers knew. Behind the pages of his published work were hundreds of hours of off-the-record interviews, anonymized statements, private documents, and encrypted messages. He didn't merely gather stories, he gathered evidence. And nestled among that evidence was something he never intended to release, at least not until the conditions were right. The recording of the call between Meghan and the unidentified handler scheduling the children's appearance was one of several pieces of material locked away in what sources close to Bauer called his vault. Not a literal vault, but a digital archive protected by multiple layers of encryption and legal review. Some believe he kept it secret because he feared for his safety. Others say he was waiting for the moment the world stopped taking the Sussex narrative at face value. Whatever the reason, the timing of its release was precise. It was early morning in London when the audio quietly hit the internet, buried in a simple blog post on a little-known but respected whistleblower website. There was no fanfare, just a caption and a scratchy but clear 3-minute clip. Meghan's voice, recognizable, unmistakably composed, could be heard discussing a schedule, not for a film shoot or an event, for the delivery of 2 children. They'll be flown in the day before. I don't want them getting tired on camera, the voice said. The other voice, male, calm, logistical, replied, understood. Both A and L. We'll make sure they're presentable. They'll have a rest window before exposure. Exposure. The word hung heavy. Not arrival. Not reunion. Exposure. Bauer didn't promote the release immediately. Instead, he waited. Watched. He knew exactly what he was doing. It would only take minutes before online communities caught wind of the recording, and once they did, it would spread like wildfire. It wasn't just the contents of the call, it was the implication, the tone, the casual efficiency of how children, believed to be living with their parents, were being referred to like props on a set. Within hours, mainstream media was scrambling, first to verify the authenticity, then to respond to the growing pressure to address. That last question became a point of obsession for commentators and royal insiders. Why now? Some theorized that Bauer had grown frustrated with the continued glamorization of Meghan and Harry's story, especially as more inconsistencies arose. Others believed he had been in contact with individuals formerly employed by the Sussexes who had reached a breaking point. One particularly persistent theory suggested that the leak had come from within Harry's own circle, someone trying to wake him up to a reality he'd refused to see. But Bauer, in the rare interviews he granted after the audio dropped, maintained a neutral stance. "I don't reveal sources," he said calmly during a live radio interview. "What I can say is that I've sat on this material for some time, waiting. Not for drama, not for revenge, for the right context. For a moment when the public was ready to question what they've been fed." Pressed on whether he believed Meghan and Harry had misled the world, Bauer didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. And this is only one example. There are more." The host fell silent, then asked, "More recordings?" "Recordings. Documents. Testimonies." "Yes." Those few words sent tremors through Buckingham Palace, the Sussex household, and every media outlet covering the royal family. If there were more tapes, more proof, what else was hidden in Bauer's vault? What narratives were poised to unravel next? Suddenly, everything was on the table. Every past public appearance was reanalyzed. Every story Meghan and Harry had told about their private life, how they played in the garden with their children, how they raised them away from the spotlight, how they protected their innocence, was now up for scrutiny. The power of Bauer's vault wasn't just in what it revealed. It was in what it suggested. That the entire architecture of the Sussex brand might have been built on tightly managed fictions. Journalists around the world began reaching out to Bauer for further comment. Most requests were denied, but those who spoke to him described a man who was calm, even eerily so. There was no glee in his tone, no theatrical sense of vengeance. Just certainty, confidence that the story he had helped ignite would no longer be extinguished by PR statements or clever interviews. Behind the scenes, Bauer's security reportedly increased. He began limiting public appearances and was seen accompanied by private guards. This wasn't paranoia. It was caution. He knew that when you expose powerful people with carefully crafted reputations, the blowback isn't always just digital. Meanwhile, inside his vault, rumors swirled about what else he might possess. One former associate hinted that Bauer had digital receipts, emails, scheduling documents, travel records that didn't align with the Sussexes' public timeline of events. Another claimed he had testimony from former nannies or assistants who had signed ironclad NDAs but were now prepared to speak. Whatever the contents were, Bauer wasn't showing all his cards. Not yet. It's important to note that Bauer has never been officially charged with illegal activity regarding his investigative methods. Every leak, every story, every revelation he's ever made has either stood up to scrutiny or been quietly buried by those who didn't want to drag the fight into the open. That's what made this moment so significant. The vault wasn't just a tabloid treasure chest. It was a surgical archive of curated, cross-verified intel. And now it had been cracked open. Legal experts began to speculate about the ramifications. Could Meghan or Harry sue? Would they attempt to block further releases? Would law enforcement be brought in if the tapes were deemed to have been acquired unlawfully? But each path was riddled with obstacles. Public figures, especially those who've engaged in storytelling themselves, are notoriously hard to protect from exposés. And any lawsuit would risk drawing more attention to the tapes and forcing open even more of Bauer's vault. For the public, the mystery became intoxicating. What else was in there? Was there video footage? Photos? Emails? What about medical documents? Could the birth certificates, long speculated to have been heavily redacted, finally see the light? Bauer wouldn't say. But in one cryptic interview, when asked what his most damning piece of evidence was, he paused for a long moment. "You haven't heard the worst of it," he finally said. That sentence alone became a headline across half a dozen major media outlets. And it sent a clear message, not just to the Sussexes, but to anyone who had supported their narrative without question. The story you think you know may be nothing more than the first draft of a much darker truth. For Prince Harry, that realization was reportedly devastating. Sources close to him claimed he made multiple attempts to contact Bauer directly, demanding an explanation, perhaps hoping to plead his innocence or negotiate. But Bauer ignored every request. He wasn't interested in a side conversation. The time for personal appeals had passed. In private, Harry allegedly began questioning his own past decisions. The story goes that he asked an advisor, "Did I sign up for this? Or did I just hand over my life and not notice?" The advisor didn't answer. Perhaps no answer would have been sufficient. Because what Bauer had unleashed wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. And as his vault threatened to open wider, the world began to realize that the fairy tale of the Sussexes was no longer unfolding on a red carpet, but crumbling beneath the weight of carefully buried secrets. It began innocently enough, with a click. A hesitant, almost skeptical click by a curious journalist sitting in front of his monitor, early morning coffee in hand, scanning through what seemed like just another blog post on a relatively obscure whistleblower website. It wasn't promoted, no press release, no tweet thread. Just a post with a low-profile headline, a 3-minute embedded audio file, and a line of unassuming text underneath. For those still asking questions, here's your answer. Within moments of pressing play, everything changed. The voice was unmistakable. "Okay, so the plan is still to have them flown in the morning before the shoot, right?" said a woman's voice, measured, articulate, refined in the way only a seasoned media figure can be. There was no hint of hesitation, no tremble or doubt. The speaker sounded like someone going over a calendar, organizing an event, preparing a prop. "Yes, ma'am. Both A and L will be on site by 9 a.m. They'll have 3 handlers each. Medical and psychological clearance has been confirmed on our end. No disruptions expected," replied a man's voice, deep, calm, practiced. The kind of voice that didn't ask questions, only confirmed details. "Good. Make sure they're camera ready. And no hugging this time. Keep it professional." Then silence. A short, tinny click, as though the recording had ended abruptly. 3 minutes. That was it. But those 3 minutes would send shockwaves through media outlets, royal watchers, political commentators, and most of all, through the personal life of Prince Harry. The moment the journalist heard the tape, he knew it wasn't fake. There was no forced drama, no pantomime. It was chilling because of its simplicity, because of its clinical tone, because the implication wasn't whispered, it was spoken plainly. The children weren't being referred to like family. They were being spoken about like assets. The journalist quickly contacted 3 of his most trusted colleagues. All listened. All had the same initial response, stunned silence. Then came the frenzy. Within minutes, the audio was verified by multiple digital forensic teams. The voice, now widely believed to be Meghan Markle's, was cross-referenced with known interviews, voice patterns, and cadence analysis. The result, a 97.4% match. Even before Tom Bauer confirmed it, the world had already accepted the truth. The tape was real. It had not been fabricated, and it wasn't taken out of context. That, perhaps, was the most damning part. There was no ambiguity. This wasn't banter or sarcasm or a misunderstood quote from years ago. This was a carefully structured conversation between a woman presumed to be Meghan Markle and a man whose identity still remained a mystery, though insiders claimed he may have worked as a coordinator for discreet international transportation services. When the tape hit mainstream media, the public response was immediate and polarizing. Hashtags began to dominate every social platform. Hashtag flown in, hashtag where are the kids, hashtag Indel, hashtag 48-hour children. Every royal video ever posted involving Archie or Lilibet was suddenly back in the spotlight. Analysts, influencers, and amateur sleuths slowed footage down, frame by frame. Eyes squinted at the corners of smiles. Fingers traced outlines for evidence of green screens. Entire YouTube channels were reborn overnight, dedicated solely to decoding the so-called Meghan audio. But the speculation wasn't just digital. It began manifesting physically, in media rooms, palace press offices, PR war rooms. The silence from Harry and Meghan's team was deafening. For 48 hours following the release, there was no statement, no rebuttal, not even a denial. And in the world of media optics, silence speaks louder than any comment ever could. Prince Harry, according to a close confidant, was blindsided, not by the public's reaction, but by the tape itself. He hadn't heard it before. The confidant said, their voice measured. He didn't even know it existed. When someone played it for him, he froze. Then he asked to hear it again. And again. By the third time, he was visibly shaking. He looked like someone who had just seen their reflection and didn't recognize the person staring back. The recording cast a dark shadow not just over Meghan's image, but over Harry's judgment. How could he not have known? Was he involved? Or was he, as some suspected, the last to find out? The questions came fast. Was it a single incident? Were the children being kept elsewhere? If so, where? Were they under someone else's guardianship? Were the appearances coordinated for publicity? And most chilling of all, were they even truly their biological children? None of these questions had answers. But now, for the first time, the world was no longer afraid to ask them. Some media figures attempted to play defense. A few commentators claimed the audio was being taken out of context, that perhaps it referred to a nanny pickup, or that flown in was an exaggeration. But digital metadata from the original source disproved that almost instantly. The recording was timestamped just days before a high-profile photo shoot at their Montecito estate, the very shoot that had produced a holiday family portrait released to the press. In that portrait, both children looked picture-perfect, smiling, clean, coordinated in their outfits. But now that photo took on a new meaning. Was it real or staged? Social media detectives went into overdrive. Private jet logs were cross-checked with dates of public appearances. A chartered flight from Wyoming to Burbank, booked the morning before a family picnic. A medical transport listed under a shell company, arrived exactly 48 hours before a Netflix event. It wasn't conclusive, but the pattern was disturbing. Too much fit. Too many coincidences lined up, like dominoes begging to be pushed. Meanwhile, former staffers, previously silenced by NDAs, began to feel empowered. One ex-nanny anonymously told a journalist, "You can't imagine the level of control. We were never allowed to speak directly to the children unless prompted. Every interaction was observed. It was like walking into a set every day." The staffer didn't confirm whether the children were full-time residents of the estate, but she didn't deny it either. "There were stretches where we didn't see them for days," she said. Tom Bauer, once again, refused to elaborate on how he obtained the tape. But when pressed, he offered a chilling remark. "I didn't go looking for it. It came to me. Someone thought the world deserved to hear it. And they were right." He confirmed that he had more evidence, that this wasn't the only tape, but he would not say how many or what they contained. And so, the mystery deepened. If this was just the first tape, what was next? Inside Montecito, the atmosphere reportedly shifted from luxury to lockdown. Several staff members were sent home. Security tightened. Meghan, sources claimed, was livid, not at the press, but at Harry. "Why weren't you watching them? Why didn't you know?" she allegedly screamed during a private confrontation. Harry, stunned and emotionally drained, didn't respond. Insiders claimed that Harry began making calls to legal advisors, asking about the validity of parental rights under surrogacy law. He allegedly requested access to sealed medical records, only to be told that those documents were protected, even from him. What had begun as a mysterious audio clip had now ignited a full-blown family crisis. And still, the public waited. For answers. For confirmation. For a statement that never came. The silence continued. But something else was happening beneath the surface. Journalists, sensing that Bauer had opened a door that could not be closed, began investigating deeper. One reporter uncovered that the handler in the recording had ties to a private surrogate consulting firm based in Argentina. Another found inconsistencies in travel documents from Meghan's maternity periods. Flights listed in her name during times when she was supposedly on bed rest. All of it was circumstantial, but all of it painted a picture that was hard to ignore. And so, the tape kept playing, over and over, in podcasts, in news segments, in reaction videos, in classrooms, in kitchens, in palaces. It was more than a scandal. It was a rupture. Because this wasn't just about Meghan Markle. It was about what happens when trust is broken at the highest level, when love is packaged, marketed, and perhaps even faked for the camera. And at the center of it all was a 3-minute clip that revealed more in silence than most people ever say out loud. In the world of public scandal, it is often the anonymous voices that end up reshaping the story in the most devastating ways. And in this particular saga, the voice of the unnamed man, the so-called handler, who calmly spoke on the now infamous audio recording alongside Meghan Markle, became the most chilling element of all. His words were not dramatic. They weren't even emotional. They were procedural, efficient, and disturbingly neutral. But it was that very detachment that sent shivers down the spines of those who listened. Because in those few lines, the implication was unmistakable. This was someone used to coordinating human logistics. Not events. Not props. People. Children. His role, until that moment, had been completely unknown to the public. There were no pictures. No press mentions. No LinkedIn profiles conveniently linked to Archwell or Montecito's staff. He was a phantom. Until his voice echoed into the digital universe and began a wave of speculation unlike anything the Sussex brand had ever faced. I'll have both A and L ready by 9. Handlers will escort them to the shoot area. Clearance has been confirmed. They'll be kept out of sight until then. The voice was low-pitched, professional. Every word was measured. No slang. No personal inflection. Not a hint of warmth. It was the tone of someone doing a job, someone for whom this kind of conversation was not new. And that was the most disturbing part. The moment this voice hit the internet, audio specialists got to work. Voice pattern experts from universities, media houses, and freelance investigative networks began dissecting the cadence, speed, pitch, and vocal fingerprint of the man behind the words. Initial analyses revealed the voice matched no known public figure tied to the Sussexes. No assistant, no PR rep, no known legal counsel or agency rep. But one pattern kept repeating. He sounded American, Midwestern, or possibly Southern California, based on tonal nuances. He was well-educated, articulate, but intentionally bland, a trait commonly found in corporate security consultants, private aviation liaisons, or elite logistics handlers who operate in sensitive, high-profile environments. People trained not to draw attention. People trained to disappear. An independent investigative outlet published a groundbreaking report only 3 days after the audio went viral. Through painstaking voice comparison and metadata tracking, they claimed to have traced the call to a private communications firm located in Denver, Colorado. This firm specialized in logistics management for high-net-worth individuals and non-traditional families. Non-traditional families. That term alone opened a floodgate of interpretations. Was this handler affiliated with a surrogate agency? A custodial management group? A PR-approved parenting consultant? The definitions blurred as more people dug deeper into the company's publicly available contracts and client portfolios. One chilling discovery stood out. A former client had once sued the same Denver firm for allegedly mishandling child transfer arrangements during a custody battle involving surrogate-born twins. The court case had been sealed shortly after filing, but records briefly available before the seal revealed that the firm offered on-demand, discreet transportation and housing for minors linked to high-profile family arrangements. Transportation and housing. For minors. That was enough to set the public imagination on fire. Suddenly, everything Meghan and Harry had ever said about their children was being reinterpreted. Every moment of pride. Every anecdote. Every appearance. What if all of it had been coordinated by voices like the one on the tape? What if Archie and Lilibet were not full-time members of the Sussex household, but part-time participants in a life crafted for optics? Journalists began pressing royal insiders for answers. A former palace staffer, who had worked directly under the late Queen Elizabeth, made a rare, on-the-record statement. "We were always perplexed by the lack of organic footage of the children," he said. Even when Prince William's children were young, there were casual videos, playing in the garden, toddling with the dog. With Archie and Lilibet, everything felt frozen. Static. Like a brand rollout, not a family album. The presence of the handler's voice now validated what had long been whispered behind closed doors, that the Sussex children may have been appearing only when needed. And if that were true, the entire public perception of Harry and Meghan's family life was a facade, constructed not around reality, but around necessity. As speculation mounted, security analysts began weighing in. A few former intelligence officers noted the precision of the language in the audio. This is the kind of voice you use when dealing with contracts that have serious legal implications, one expert said. He didn't say names. He said A and L. That's not affection. That's protocol. A media ethics professor from the University of Toronto published a column titled "The Human Cost of Optics," in which she wrote, "The most unnerving element of this scandal is not the possibility that children are being flown in for photo ops. It's the normalization of corporate-style management over family intimacy. The handler represents something we hoped didn't exist, parenting by proxy, executed through legal arrangements and marketing schedules." Behind the scenes, the handler's identity remained elusive. Tom Bauer refused to reveal how he acquired the recording, but a growing number of insiders suggested the voice belonged to a man known only as Lucas, a pseudonym used by a long-standing consultant connected to both private surrogate agencies and elite child management firms that operate outside traditional adoption or foster care systems. According to one high-profile whistleblower from the surrogacy industry, Lucas was the kind of person who makes the impossible happen quietly. She described him as not a bad man, but a necessary one in a world where image matters more than authenticity. In her own words, people like Meghan don't hire babysitters. They hire shadows. People who arrange arrivals, departures, and nothing else. No hugs, no goodbyes, just the click of a car door and a calendar invite. When this quote hit headlines, it was as though someone had peeled the final layer off an already festering wound. Prince Harry, upon learning of the potential connection between Meghan and Lucas, was said to be completely disoriented. According to a trusted source inside his inner circle, Harry made multiple attempts to confirm whether Lucas had ever been officially employed by Archewell or retained as a contractor for family logistics. But every inquiry was either redirected or quietly shut down. In one particularly tense moment, Harry reportedly asked a former house staffer directly, "Who else knew? Was this happening while I was in the house? Or was I being managed too?" The staffer had no answer. Therein lay the true horror of the handler's voice. It didn't just cast doubt on the presence of the children. It cast doubt on Harry's own agency, on his own understanding of his life. Had he been deceived? Or had he participated in the deception, however unknowingly? Meghan, according to sources, refused to discuss the voice. When confronted by Harry, she allegedly brushed it off. "It's old. It's out of context. People are always trying to twist things." But Harry wasn't convinced. Because for the first time, he heard not just a stranger's voice, but a system, a machinery, one that functioned around him, with or without his awareness. The public, meanwhile, continued dissecting every syllable. The line, "no hugging this time," became symbolic, an emotional indictment against what was perceived as cold manipulation. Commentators asked, if you're telling someone not to hug your own children, who are you trying to fool? The audience or yourself? Podcasters, YouTubers, radio hosts, everyone joined the discussion. And gradually, one painful truth began to emerge. The voice from the shadows wasn't just a handler. He was a mirror, one that reflected a version of the Sussex family that many had hoped was fiction but now feared was fact. A version where the children weren't part of a loving home, but were components in a carefully managed story. And that story, once inspiring, had now turned into a chilling allegory for the commodification of family. The moment Prince Harry heard the recording, the air left the room. According to a palace insider-turned-California staffer, the mood inside the Montecito mansion was already tense in the hours after the tape had been released online. The internet was ablaze, Twitter was boiling, and international newsrooms were clearing space on their homepages to cover what had just become the most explosive royal story of the decade. But inside the Sussex estate, behind the polished gates and manicured hedges, things had turned eerily quiet. Meghan had retreated to her private wing. The staff tiptoed, and Harry, they say, sat alone in the family's media room, watching the waveform of the leaked audio on repeat, his jaw clenched so tight it seemed he might break his own teeth. He didn't speak for almost an hour. Not when the staff first played the clip. Not when his security advisor handed him the printed transcript. Not even when one of his closest aides asked gently, "Sir, are you all right?" Instead, he pressed the spacebar again. "They'll be flown in the day before." Click. Replay. "Make sure they're camera ready." Click. Replay. Each time he listened, his face shifted slightly. Shock. Then confusion. Then disbelief. But as the minutes passed and the weight of the tape set in, those expressions gave way to something darker, something that looked a lot like betrayal. By the third hour, Harry snapped. He stood abruptly, knocking over a crystal tumbler filled with untouched water, and yelled, "Where the hell did this come from? Who had this? Who let this get out?" His voice thundered down the hallway. A housekeeper, not realizing he was in the room, gasped and fled in tears. For someone often known for being soft-spoken and measured in private, this outburst wasn't just surprising, it was terrifying. But it wasn't anger aimed at the media. It wasn't rage toward Tom Bauer or the digital forensics teams who had authenticated the tape. It wasn't even directed at the voice of the man, the handler, whose emotionless confirmation of the children's transportation schedule had started this nightmare. It was directed at the one voice on the recording that Harry could not ignore. Meghan's. There she was, on the audio, speaking about their children, or what the world believed were their children, as if she were organizing props for a photo shoot. No warmth, no maternal softness, just cold, logistical clarity. And it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. It was the unshakable sense that this wasn't the first time she'd had that kind of conversation, that this wasn't some one-off anomaly. This was a system Harry might not have even known existed. That realization hit him harder than any punch ever could. According to multiple sources who claim to have been near the couple's inner circle in those days, Harry became increasingly erratic in the aftermath of the leak. One staffer said he began making frantic phone calls to trusted friends back in the UK. He was desperate, the source said. He kept asking if they'd ever noticed anything strange during his and Meghan's visits. If the kids ever seemed off. He was trying to find something, anything, that would either prove the tape wrong or confirm his worst fears. One of the first people Harry reportedly called was his old military friend from the army, someone known to be a grounding presence in his life. The conversation, though private, was described as harrowing. Harry allegedly confessed that he didn't recognize his own home anymore, that he felt like a guest in a life he thought he had built from scratch. "I gave everything up for this," he allegedly said, "and now I'm not sure what this even is." Another call went to a former therapist Harry had seen during the height of his mental health advocacy work. According to an aide who managed the call schedule, Harry was pacing, almost whispering into the phone. "She's not who I thought she was," he said. "And the kids, I don't even know what to believe anymore." Those close to him say that Meghan's reaction to the leak didn't help. While Harry was spiraling, trying to piece together timelines and decipher whether he had unknowingly participated in a performance, Meghan was reportedly calm, too calm. She denied everything, of course. She claimed the tape was doctored, claimed it was out of context, claimed the voice didn't sound like hers. But she never got angry, never panicked, never once asked, "Who would do this to us?" Which, to Harry, felt like the most glaring omission of all. Her calm made him more paranoid, said a staff member who overheard several of their conversations from behind closed doors. It was like he was falling apart in real time, and she was reading a script. That unnerved him. The tension between them reached a fever pitch just 3 days after the leak. According to an insider, the confrontation happened late at night, in their private living room. Harry had been drinking, something he'd tried hard to avoid since becoming a father. The staff was dismissed early, which was unusual. What happened next would ripple through the household. "You lied to me," Harry reportedly shouted. "You lied to me, Meg. About everything. About them. About us." Meghan, calm as ever, allegedly replied, "You're overreacting. It's a tape. That's all." But Harry wasn't buying it. He accused her of staging the children's appearances, of controlling who saw them, and when. He demanded to see travel records, flight logs, custody agreements, anything that could explain why their children would need to be flown in before media events. When she refused, Harry reportedly left the house. He didn't take the car. He didn't even take his phone. He walked. For hours. Just a former prince, barefoot in California gravel, alone in the dark, walking away from a life that suddenly felt like a house of cards built by someone else's hand. During that walk, Harry made a decision that insiders claim may mark a permanent shift in his marriage. He called a private investigator, not one hired by Meghan or their legal team, one he had used years ago before he left the UK. And he asked a simple question. "I need you to verify something for me," he reportedly said. Everything. From that point forward, Harry's demeanor changed. He became quieter, less reactive, more observant. He began reviewing contracts, things he had previously trusted Meghan to manage. Legal agreements related to Archwell, to surrogate arrangements, to digital copyrights on the children's images. He asked lawyers questions that made them visibly uncomfortable. In one tense meeting, according to a source familiar with the interaction, Harry allegedly said, "If I were to ask for a DNA test now, who would block it?" That single sentence was a thunderclap. It wasn't just a question of logistics. It was a question of identity, of paternity, of whether Prince Harry, son of a king, war veteran, global humanitarian, had been living a lie so elaborate, so meticulously staged, that even he hadn't seen the strings until they were yanked. The days that followed were a media circus. Paparazzi swarmed Montecito. Legal experts filled airwaves. Former royal insiders gave tepid statements of concern. But inside the mansion, a marriage was beginning to fracture, if it hadn't already. Harry became reclusive, spent more time in his study, pulled away from video calls and foundation planning. Several scheduled interviews were abruptly canceled. When asked why, Meghan reportedly said Harry wasn't feeling well. But those who caught glimpses of him said he looked more than unwell. He looked haunted. One particular staff member recalled seeing him at sunrise, sitting alone on the veranda, holding a photo of the children, one of their earliest portraits. He was just staring at it, she said, like he was trying to figure out if it was real. And perhaps that's what hurt the most. Not the tape, not the fallout, not even the betrayal, but the creeping suspicion that the thing he had fought for, sacrificed for, and nearly destroyed his family ties over, may have been built on fiction. In the coming weeks, Harry would distance himself even further from Meghan, from public appearances, even from close friends. But inside those quiet walls, a storm was still brewing. Because he hadn't yet confronted the most dangerous question of all. If everything was scripted, who wrote the story? In a world where Meghan Markle's voice was once heard everywhere, from primetime interviews and high-profile podcast episodes to staged philanthropic speeches and carefully worded statements, her silence following the release of the leaked tape felt like an earthquake that rumbled beneath polished floors. No press release, no Instagram post, not even a carefully coordinated public appearance holding hands with Prince Harry to present a united front. Just nothing. And for a woman who built her post-royal brand on reclaiming her voice, on speaking her truth, the absence of that voice now rang louder than any denial ever could. Those close to Meghan described her response as measured. Others called it controlled. But behind the scenes, insiders painted a very different picture, one not of calm, but of calculation. According to sources within the Sussex household, Meghan's reaction to the leaked audio was not one of panic. There were no slammed doors or teary breakdowns. Instead, there was a slow and deliberate tightening of the circle. Communication staff were ordered to halt all outbound messaging. Publicists were told to defer media inquiries. Legal counsel was summoned, not to challenge the authenticity of the tape, but to assess liability exposure and advise on next steps. It wasn't personal. It was strategic. She didn't respond emotionally, said one staffer, speaking under the condition of anonymity. Not the way you'd expect a mother to respond if someone was suggesting her children weren't actually with her. It was robotic, like she was managing a company in crisis, not a family under attack. This reaction, or lack thereof, ignited a wave of suspicion across both media and public forums. It wasn't just that Meghan didn't deny the allegations. It was that she seemed disinterested in doing so at all. And in the vacuum left by her silence, speculation turned toxic. She could have released a video, said one media strategist on a popular news panel. Held Lilibet in her arms, had Archie running around in the background. That's all it would have taken. One raw, authentic moment. But she didn't. And that makes people ask, why not? Some believe the silence was tactical, a way to avoid giving the story more oxygen. Others suspected it was an admission of sorts, that perhaps Meghan believed there was no plausible rebuttal that wouldn't invite even more scrutiny. Either way, her refusal to confront the scandal head-on stood in stark contrast to her previous approach of fighting fire with fury. Just months earlier, when a British tabloid published an unverified account claiming Meghan had ghosted several charities she had once promised to support, she responded within 24 hours. A full statement, quotes from beneficiaries, a slideshow of behind-the-scenes charity work. The message was loud and clear: I am in control of my story. But now, with the world demanding answers about the logistics of her children's appearances, her motherhood, In her marriage, there was only one message coming from her camp: silence. That silence, some argue, was the result of internal fear. Not fear of public opinion, but fear of what more might come out. Multiple media outlets reported that Tom Bower's vault contained more than just one recording, that there were at least 2 more pieces of unreleased evidence. And according to a producer who once worked with Meghan on a Netflix pitch, she knew it. She's always had a sixth sense for risk, the producer said. If something could backfire, she'd rather pull the plug than try to explain it away. So when the tape dropped, and she realized there might be more, she did what she always does. She shut everything down. Inside the Montecito estate, this shutdown extended beyond PR. Meghan reportedly limited her own movement within the house. She stopped holding strategy sessions in the kitchen or on the sun deck. Her office door, once always open to her team, now remained shut for hours at a time. Staff were instructed to communicate with her via intermediaries. Even Harry, already growing distant, found her increasingly unavailable. She was behind a wall, said one household assistant. A digital wall, a legal wall, and a personal one. No one could reach her. Even her mother, Doria Ragland, usually seen as her closest confidant, was said to have been kept at arm's length. A source claimed Doria had flown in for what was supposed to be a week-long stay to support her daughter. But after only 2 days, she left, citing space issues. Whether that meant literal or emotional space, no one could say for sure. But while Meghan said nothing, the world spoke louder. Social media erupted. Where once there had been fans defending her against critics and accusing the media of racism or misogyny, there were now voices asking more nuanced, deeply personal questions. Why weren't there spontaneous videos of the children? Why did every photo feel choreographed? Why were there no blurry, chaotic, beautiful messes of real life? The silence created a vacuum. And in that vacuum, narratives formed, narratives Meghan had no control over. Even longtime defenders began to falter. A feminist author who had once written a viral op-ed defending Meghan's decision to step away from royal duties tweeted, "I want to believe her. But I also want to see her, hear her, anything. This silence is deafening." Still, Meghan remained unmoved. Some speculated she was preparing a bigger move, that perhaps she was crafting a documentary-style rebuttal, something grand and impossible to ignore. But if she was, there was no sign of it. Others suggested something more chilling, that Meghan didn't speak because she didn't know what to say, that for the first time, her storytelling instincts had failed her. The narrative she had so carefully woven, of a woman betrayed, a mother protecting her family, a couple finding freedom, had been fractured by a voice that wasn't hers, a voice that called her bluff. This theory gained traction when a high-level producer from a major streaming platform revealed that Meghan's team had recently requested a pause on several ongoing projects. Scripts were halted, contracts reviewed, pre-production meetings canceled. There was no explanation given, just silence. Behind the scenes, legal teams quietly circled the wagons. Lawyers combed through previous NDAs, child privacy clauses, and medical records, not to prepare a lawsuit, but to figure out if anything else could leak. Meghan's top concern wasn't reputation, according to one of her former PR advisors. It was containment. She knew the real damage wasn't the tape itself, the advisor said. It was the questions it raised, and the answers she couldn't give. As days turned into a week, and the world continued to dissect every word of the recording, Meghan's silence grew heavier, more suspicious, more damning. Because in the age of transparency, where public figures are expected to perform emotional honesty on demand, her refusal to even feign outrage was seen not as grace, but as guilt. And while Meghan stayed silent, Harry began speaking, but only to himself. One particularly heartbreaking moment reportedly occurred late at night, when Harry wandered into the kitchen and found a junior staffer cleaning up. The young man, caught off guard, greeted him with a polite nod. Harry stood silently for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you think they know? The kids. Do you think they'll grow up and find all this? Read all this?" The staffer didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Harry nodded, as if expecting that. Then he added, "I just don't want them to hate me for it." And with that, he turned and left. It was clear now, Meghan's silence wasn't protecting the children. It wasn't protecting Harry. It wasn't even protecting herself. It was protecting a story, one that had already started to fall apart. And as she remained behind her wall of silence, the world outside moved on, with or without her narrative. Long before the tape was leaked, long before Tom Bower's carefully timed detonation shattered the illusion of a picture-perfect royal exile, there were whispers. Not accusations, not bold claims, just quiet, unnerving inconsistencies in the way Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana appeared, and more often, didn't appear, in the lives of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. When the world first learned Meghan was pregnant with Archie, the excitement was palpable. The first mixed-race child born into the British royal family was a global symbol of change. But from the beginning, there were questions. The announcement came late. Her bump appeared and disappeared with strange elasticity, prompting speculative corners of the internet to accuse her of using a prosthetic belly. These theories were dismissed as fringe, even dangerous. But years later, in the wake of the leaked audio that included Meghan scheduling the children to be flown in, those same questions began clawing their way back into the conversation with fresh force. The phrase that caught the world's attention and refuses to let go was simple. They'll be flown in for 48 hours. That line suggested a limitation, a window, a transaction, not the language of a parent raising children full-time, not the words of a mother scheduling a school drop-off or a soccer practice. No, this was logistics. This was precision. This was something entirely different. The theory that took hold in the days that followed was dubbed the 48-hour theory. It began on Reddit, then spread to Twitter and YouTube like wildfire. The central claim? That Archie and Lilibet do not reside with Meghan and Harry full-time, or possibly at all. Instead, the children are allegedly flown in or otherwise brought to the couple in advance of key media events, public appearances, or staged family moments. This theory was no longer considered the wild rant of conspiracy theorists. Mainstream media outlets were forced to engage with it. Former palace aides, psychologists, and even aviation experts weighed in. Was it possible? Could two children, already under intense public scrutiny, be shuttled in and out of a household without anyone noticing? And if so, why? The most common answer came down to one word: control. In a traditional setting, raising children is chaotic, unpredictable. But in the Sussex universe, everything appeared orderly, calculated. There were no tantrums caught on camera, no candid moments, no instances of Archie clinging to Harry's leg during a Zoom call or Lilibet wandering into the background. Just curated portraits, usually still, often with eyes not looking directly at the camera. It wasn't just that the children were private. It was that they were missing from the rhythm of real life. Once the theory gained traction, internet sleuths went into overdrive. Flight logs, social media timestamps, paparazzi sightings, everything was reviewed. And what they found was chilling. During a key Netflix documentary shoot in which the Sussexes shared intimate family moments, there had been a private flight from Nevada to Santa Barbara, landing less than 24 hours before the cameras began rolling. That same flight departed 48 hours later. It was listed under a shell company with no registered business operations, but had a history of operating high-security, anonymous charters. No names were made public, but multiple sources confirmed the aircraft was equipped for specialized VIP transport, with family configurations. Similar patterns began to emerge in the data surrounding other notable Sussex events. Lilibet's first birthday party in the UK coincided with a brief but well-documented private flight arriving from Spain and leaving just 2 days later. Paparazzi never photographed her outside of that brief party photo. Was it a coincidence? Perhaps. But once people started looking, too many pieces seemed to fit. Even within the Montecito community, there were subtle but persistent gaps. Several neighbors, in off-the-record conversations with journalists, admitted they had never seen the children. Not at the playground, not at the local farmer's market, not even being walked in strollers around the estate grounds. They're like shadows, one resident said. You hear about them, but you never see them. That absence became the cornerstone of the 48-hour theory. Because it wasn't just about flights, it was about visibility. Or rather, the lack of it. The question wasn't just where the children were when the cameras weren't rolling. The question was, did anyone outside the Sussex inner circle ever witness them at all? As the theory spread, body language experts were brought in to analyze Meghan and Harry's interactions with the children in photos and footage. What they found only deepened the mystery. In one family portrait, Meghan held Lilibet slightly awkwardly, with a flat hand under her midsection rather than cradling her shoulder or neck, an unusual posture for a mother with a 1-year-old. In another video of Harry reading a book to Archie, the child never once moved out of frame. His hands remained unnaturally still. His facial expressions never changed. These analyses didn't confirm anything, but they didn't comfort anyone either. And then there were the inconsistencies in public records. Despite being born in the United States, Lilibet's birth certificate remained heavily redacted. California law does allow limited access to certain vital records, but attempts by multiple journalists to confirm even basic details. Hospital name, attending physician, were met with legal roadblocks or incomplete data. One investigative team found that the name Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor had been listed in public databases for several months before her alleged birth date. When they reached out to the relevant registrar's office, they were told the entry had been amended by request of a third party. No explanation was offered. This bureaucratic murkiness only added fuel to the growing fire. If Meghan and Harry were raising their children full-time, why so much secrecy? Why so much red tape? Why so many layers of distance? A psychologist who specializes in media and family identity explained it this way. Children who live in authentic family environments are not hidden away like national secrets. While privacy is one thing, total absence is another. When a parent constantly controls every image, every quote, every moment of their child's exposure, it's not protection, it's curation. And if the 48-hour theory was even partially true, then what did that say about the emotional lives of these children? Were they shuffled from one residence to another, existing as symbols more than sons and daughters? And what did it say about Harry, who once described being a father as the most grounding thing that ever happened to him? Some speculated that Harry had no idea the extent to which the children's movements were managed, that perhaps he genuinely believed the travel was for their safety. Others believed he was a participant in the illusion, either by denial or necessity. But whatever the truth was, it was becoming harder to dismiss the mounting body of circumstantial evidence pointing toward a carefully controlled, time-limited interaction between the children and their parents, especially their mother. It wasn't just internet sleuths piecing this together anymore. Journalists, royal watchers, and child welfare advocates were now involved. A coalition of former childcare specialists publicly called for transparency, saying, if the children are safe and with their parents, then showing that truth, even in the smallest ways, would silence all doubt. But the refusal to do so creates exactly the kind of hysteria the Sussexes claim to despise. Public sentiment began to fracture. Meghan and Harry had once enjoyed a solid core of defenders who viewed their departure from royal life as an act of courage. But now, even those voices began to question the cost of their independence. Because it wasn't about race anymore. It wasn't about class or the monarchy or media ethics. It was about two children, where they were, who they lived with, and why no one could say for sure. Tom Bower, still silent on the rest of his vault, fanned the flames ever so slightly when asked by a reporter if the 48-hour theory had merit. He replied simply, sometimes the simplest answer is the most painful one. That line, now infamous, was repeated across every talk show, podcast, and commentary column for days. Because if the simplest answer was that the children weren't living with their parents full-time, the most painful part wasn't the deception, it was the why. Were they protected, hidden, hired, adopted, borrowed, or worse? The answers remained elusive. But the questions, now impossible to suppress, had carved deep fault lines in the public's trust. And at the heart of it all, Archie and Lilibet, two small children, innocent in all this, were being transformed from symbols of progress into symbols of secrecy. Because if your children are part of your brand, but not your everyday life, then what are they really?